One minute you're munching on a $2 bag of chips in a grocery line, and the next, you're being tossed into a squad car. In the land of the free, the gap between a normal Tuesday and a felony record is thinner than a single-ply tissue. We are exposing 50 real, head-spinning stories where average Americans traded their living rooms for jail cells over absolute nonsense. These aren't just quirks of the law. They are terrifying reminders that the only thing standing between you and a jumpsuit is a cop with a bad attitude. 1. In Florida, a man found himself in handcuffs for the high crime of feeding the homeless in a public park. Now, you'd think sharing a meal would earn you a community service award, but 90-year-old Arnold Abbott faced jail time because he didn't have a permit for his outdoor feeding site. The city claimed it was a matter of public hygiene, but to everyone else, it looked like the government was literally criminalizing kindness. Imagine explaining to your cellmate that you're doing hard time for a turkey club. Is compassion really a threat to public order? 2. A man in Florida was arrested for impersonating a police officer because he was wearing a t-shirt that said police in giant letters. The catch? He was also wearing neon pink shorts, flip-flops, and was holding a giant stuffed panda he'd won at a fair. Despite the fact that no sane human would mistake him for an undercover detective, the local precinct argued his shirt could cause public confusion. He spent a night in jail for a fashion choice that was clearly meant as a joke. When did the fashion police get actual arrest powers? 3. An Ohio woman found herself behind bars for kidnapping her own dog from a local animal shelter. Her pup had escaped the yard and was picked up by animal control, but when she arrived to claim him, the facility was closed. Seeing her dog shivering through the fence, she climbed over and took him home. By morning, the police were at her door charging her with breaking and entering and theft. She went to jail for the crime of wanting to tuck her best friend into bed. 4. A man in Georgia was arrested for disorderly conduct because he opened a bag of chips in a grocery store before paying for them. He was standing in a massive line, his blood sugar was dropping, and he planned to scan the empty bag at the register. A security guard accused him of shoplifting, and when the man tried to explain, the situation escalated into an arrest for causing a public disturbance. He spent the night in jail over a $2 bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. Have you ever been so hungry that you almost caught a felony charge? 5. In Louisiana, a man was arrested for disturbing a funeral because his car's car alarm went off during a graveside service nearby. He wasn't even at the funeral. He was in a store across the street. By the time he got back to his vehicle to turn it off, the police were waiting. They claimed his mechanical negligence was a criminal act of disrespect. He spent the weekend in jail because his key fob malfunctioned at the worst possible psychological moment for the town's social peace. 6. A woman in Georgia was jailed for pedestrian solicitation because she was standing on a sidewalk holding a sign that said, "Need a job." She wasn't begging for money or blocking traffic. She was literally trying to find employment. The local ordinance prohibited asking for anything of value in a public space, and the police decided her resume was a legal threat. She spent 2 nights in a cell for the crime of wanting to work. Is there anything more ironic than being jailed for trying to escape poverty? 7. In Michigan, a woman was threatened with jail time and officially charged for the act of planting a vegetable garden in her own front yard. The city ordinance required suitable ground cover, which apparently meant boring green grass and definitely not delicious organic tomatoes. She faced 93 days in jail because her zucchini was deemed a nuisance to the aesthetic of the neighborhood. It's a strange day when the law prefers a chemically treated lawn over a sustainable food source. Why are we so obsessed with forcing everyone to have the exact same front yard? 8. In Georgia, a man was arrested for peddling without a license because he was giving away free hugs on a street corner. He had a cardboard sign and was trying to spread some positivity, but the city argued that he was occupying public space for a private enterprise, even though no money was changing hands. The police claimed he was a distraction to motorists. He spent a night in jail for the crime of being too friendly. When did a hug become a threat to the public's well-being? 9. In Texas, a man was arrested for disorderly conduct because he emitted a particularly loud and intentional flatulence while standing in a crowded line at the DMV. An officer nearby deemed it a physical act of aggression and a public nuisance. While most people would just move away and hold their breath, the law decided this was a criminal violation of public peace. He was processed into the system for a biological function that was, admittedly, rude, but hardly a felony. 10. A man in Florida was arrested and jailed for the theft of a single piece of citrus fruit. He plucked an orange from a tree that hung over a public sidewalk, and the homeowner, who apparently had nothing better to do, called the cops. Because the fruit had a specific market value and was taken from private property, it was classified as petty theft. He spent the night in a cell for a snack that costs about 50 cents. It's the ultimate forbidden fruit story, proving that some people value their oranges more than their neighbor's freedom. 11. A man in North Carolina once spent time in a cell because he didn't have a permit for his pet deer. He had rescued the animal and it lived in his house like a golden retriever, wearing a collar and sleeping on a sofa. However, the state classified this as illegal possession of wildlife. Despite a massive public outcry to save Dottie the deer, the law was unyielding. The owner was arrested, and the state's rigid adherence to bureaucracy over a harmless rescue felt like a punch in the gut to animal lovers everywhere. Should a piece of paper really dictate whether you can save a life? 12. In Maryland, a man was arrested for possession of a burglary tool because he had a pair of common pliers in his pocket while walking home late at night. The police argued that since he was in a high-crime area, the pliers were intended for breaking and entering. There was no evidence of a crime, no broken windows, and no stolen goods, just a guy with a tool he used for his job. It's a chilling reminder that in the eyes of an overzealous officer, your toolbox can be rebranded as a criminal kit in seconds. 13. In Tennessee, a man was arrested for malicious destruction of property because he slammed a door too hard at a government office. He was frustrated by the long wait times and, on his way out, gave the door a protest thud. The door happened to pop off its hinge, which was interpreted as a physical attack on state property. He was tackled in the hallway and processed for vandalism. Is losing your temper in a slow-moving line worth a permanent criminal record? 14. A woman in Georgia was actually jailed for several days because she couldn't pay a fine for overgrown grass. She was living on a fixed income and couldn't afford a lawn service, and her physical health made it impossible for her to mow it herself. Instead of a helping hand, the city gave her a pair of handcuffs. This wasn't about public safety. It was about the crime of being poor in a neighborhood that demanded perfection. When did our lawns become more important than our neighbor's dignity? 15. In Maryland, a contractor's life was turned upside down when a routine traffic stop ended in a prison cell over a pile of dust. Police spotted white crumbs on his floor mat, and despite his explanations that it was just debris from a drywall job, they insisted it was a high-level controlled substance. A faulty field test kit gave a false positive, and he spent weeks behind bars waiting for a lab to prove he wasn't a kingpin, but just a guy who needed a vacuum. 16. A New Jersey man found himself behind bars for possessing a weapon that was actually an antique flintlock pistol from the 1700s. He was a collector of historical artifacts and had the unloaded, non-functional relic in his car. Despite it being a piece of American history that literally couldn't fire, the state's strict gun laws didn't distinguish between a modern Glock and a museum piece. He faced years in prison for owning a hunk of wood and iron that belonged in a glass case, not a crime scene. 17. Imagine being treated like a federal smuggler over a common stick. In Virginia, a man was arrested for theft of government property because he picked up a large fallen branch in a national park to use as a walking hike. The rangers claimed every splinter on that land is a vital part of the ecosystem, and removing it is legally equivalent to looting a museum. He spent the night in a cell for essentially picking up forest debris that was destined to rot. Does it feel right to jail someone for stealing a piece of dead wood that nature discarded? 18. A young man in Tennessee was jailed for theft of services because he jumped a turnstile. Not to get on a train, but to get out of a station. He had lost his ticket during the ride and couldn't exit through the automated gate. Instead of finding an attendant, he hopped over, only to be tackled by undercover transit police. He offered to pay the fare right then and there, but the system wanted a mugshot instead of his $3. Does the punishment really fit the crime when the theft is just an exit strategy? 19. In Louisiana, a man was arrested for criminal mischief because he put a small plastic skeleton on a neighbor's porch as a harmless Halloween prank. The neighbor, who apparently had a zero-tolerance policy for spooky decor, claimed it caused extreme emotional distress. The police, rather than telling the neighbor to lighten up, processed the prankster into the system. It's official, in some parts of the country, having a sense of humor is a literal liability. Are we really living in a society where a plastic bone is a legal threat? 20. A woman in California was arrested for operating a business without a license because she was selling ceviche in a private Facebook group. She was a single mother trying to make ends meet by sharing her grandmother's recipes with neighbors. The local health department conducted an undercover sting, lured her to a parking lot, and arrested her for selling home-cooked fish. They treated her like a drug trafficker for selling lime-marinated shrimp. Why is the government spending tax dollars on ceviche stings instead of fixing actual problems? 21. Imagine being treated like a cartel boss because you wanted to save $5 on a haircut. In Florida, a man was actually hauled off to jail for practicing barbering without a license. He wasn't even charging people, he was just giving his friends fades in his garage. The state sent in an undercover agent to get a trim and then signal a backup team to swarm the driveway. They handcuffed him over a pair of clippers and some loose hair on the floor. It makes you wonder, at what point did a lopsided buzz cut become a threat to national security? 22. If you think your library fines are bad, consider the case of the man in New Mexico who was arrested at a traffic stop because of an outstanding warrant for a missing copy of the Twilight Saga, New Moon. He hadn't returned the book in years, and the library had actually turned the case over to the police. He spent a night in a holding cell surrounded by actual criminals, all because he forgot to return a story about sparkling vampires. 23. In South Carolina, there is an ancient law that makes it a crime to play pinball if you are under the age of 18. While it sounds like a joke, one teenager actually found himself in a police cruiser because a disgruntled business owner called the cops on him for illegal gaming. The law was a relic from a time when pinball was considered gambling and a gateway to delinquency. He wasn't out breaking windows or stealing cars. He was just trying to beat a high score. 24. Let's talk about the fortune teller task force. In Pennsylvania, a woman was arrested and charged with a third-degree felony for the crime of telling fortunes for money. An undercover officer paid her for a tarot reading, and as soon as she predicted he'd find love, she found herself in handcuffs. The law specifically prohibits predicting the future for gain. It's a bizarre legal paradox. If she were actually psychic, shouldn't she have seen the arrest coming? Do you think the government should be the arbiter of what counts as real magic? 25. A man in Texas once faced a jail sentence for the theft of trash. He was a practitioner of dumpster diving, salvaging perfectly good, discarded food and electronics from behind a big box store to donate to the homeless. The store didn't want the items, but they also didn't want him having them, so they pressed charges for theft of property. He was arrested for taking things that were literally on their way to a landfill. It's a mind-bending reality where discarding something makes it trash, but picking it up makes it a felony. 26. Picture this. You're at a professional baseball game, a foul ball flies into the stands, you catch it, and then you're arrested? That happened to a fan in Massachusetts who refused to give the ball back to a stadium employee who claimed it was team property. The scuffle escalated until the police intervened, charging him with larceny and disorderly conduct. He went from a souvenir-catching hero to a criminal suspect in 30 seconds. Why are we paying hundreds of dollars for tickets if we can't even keep the debris that flies at our faces? 27. Imagine going to jail for theft because you tried to return a lost wallet. In Pennsylvania, a man found a wallet on a park bench, checked the ID, and drove to the owner's house to hand-deliver it. The owner noticed $5 was missing, likely dropped out earlier, and called the police. Because the man was in possession of the stolen goods, he was arrested on the spot. His good deed was rewarded with a mugshot and a larceny charge. Does this mean the only safe way to be a good Samaritan is to keep your hands in your pockets? 28. A man in Connecticut was arrested for speeding on a bicycle. He was coasting down a steep hill in a residential zone where the limit was 25 miles per hour. A radar gun clocked him at 30, and the officer decided the law applies to anything with wheels. He was handcuffed for a reckless operation, despite having no engine and no way to calibrate his own speed. It's a strange world where your own leg muscles can technically turn you into a motorized fugitive. 29. A woman in New York was arrested for money laundering because she used $200 worth of nickels to pay a disputed fine at a government office. She was frustrated with a bogus ticket and decided to pay in the most annoying way possible. The clerk refused to accept the coins, an argument ensued, and the police were called. They claimed that structuring a payment in small denominations was suspicious activity. Since when is legal tender illegal? Have you ever been so petty that you'd risk a night in jail just to prove a point? 30. In New Jersey, a man was arrested for possession of an imitation firearm because he was carrying a bright blue, plastic Nerf gun to a friend's house for a themed party. Despite the orange tip and the fact that it shot foam darts, a nervous neighbor called 911 reporting a man with a rifle. The police responded with full force, and because the state's laws on look-alike weapons are incredibly strict, he was charged and jailed. It's a sobering thought that a toy from a department store can be a one-way ticket to a felony record. 31. Imagine being treated like a high-stakes jewelry thief for finding a shiny rock on the ground. In Arkansas, at the crater of Diamond State Park, a visitor was actually detained and faced charges because he found a valuable diamond and tried to leave without registering it properly with the authorities. Even though the park's motto is literally finders keepers, the legal technicalities regarding the size and value of the stone turned a lucky afternoon into a criminal investigation. He was surrounded by rangers and police as if he'd just robbed the Louvre, all for a pebble he picked up in the dirt. 32. An Illinois woman was arrested for theft after she took her husband's cell phone to read his text messages. He called the police, claiming larceny of personal property, and the law actually took his side. Because the phone plan was in his name only, her snooping was legally classified as a robbery. She spent 24 hours in jail, discovering that in the eyes of the law, a marriage license doesn't grant you a search warrant for a spouse's inbox. 33. A man in Missouri found himself in a prison jumpsuit because he missed a debtor's exam. He owed a few $100s for an old medical bill, and when he didn't show up to a court hearing about his finances, a judge issued a warrant for his arrest. In a country that supposedly abolished debtors' prisons in the 1830s, thousands of Americans are still jailed every year for being too poor to pay civil debts. They aren't jailed for the debt itself, but for contempt of court, because they couldn't afford a lawyer or a ride to the courthouse. 34. In Mississippi, a man was jailed for disturbing the peace because his lawnmower was too aggressive on a Sunday morning. A neighbor, who happened to be a retired local official, called in a noise complaint, claiming the engine was an act of acoustic assault. Instead of just turning it off, the man argued about his property rights, leading to an immediate arrest. Do you have a neighbor petty enough to turn a landscaping chore into a police standoff? 35. A woman in Florida was arrested for battery on a law enforcement officer because she accidentally splashed a tiny bit of water on a policeman's boot. She was playing with her kids at a public fountain, and a few stray droplets landed on the officer's polished leather. He claimed she intentionally projected the liquid to disrespect him. She was tackled and taken to jail while her children watched in horror. It's a terrifying world when a stray splash from a fountain is legally equivalent to a physical assault. 36. In Texas, a man was arrested for theft of service after he complained about a bad haircut and refused to pay the full price. The barber called the police, and instead of a civil dispute, it became a criminal matter. The man offered to pay half since the back of his head looked like it had been mown by a drunk teenager, but the law saw it as stealing labor. He was handcuffed right there in the barber's chair, cape and all, and driven to the station with the worst haircut of his life. 37. Imagine being a fugitive from justice over a dog's birthday party. In Connecticut, a woman was arrested because her dog was barking too loudly during a backyard gathering. The neighbors called the cops, she refused to stop the party, and she was eventually charged with creating a public nuisance. When she missed her court date because she thought the ticket was a joke, a warrant was issued. She was eventually arrested during a routine traffic stop years later. 38. In Utah, a man was arrested for disorderly conduct simply because he swore at a piece of machinery. He was at a self-checkout lane that kept malfunctioning, and in a moment of relatable frustration, he dropped an F-bomb at the stubborn kiosk. An undercover officer nearby decided that the air was now too salty for public consumption and took him to jail. Apparently, the First Amendment has a vending machine exception in some jurisdictions. Have you ever been so frustrated with technology that you almost caught a criminal charge? 39. In Wisconsin, a man was arrested for fraudulent use of a credit card because he used his wife's card to buy gas with her full permission. The gas station attendant noticed the name on the card was female, and instead of just asking for ID, hit the silent alarm. The man was detained by police, and despite his wife calling the station to confirm she authorized the purchase, he was taken to jail for identity theft. Apparently, in some jurisdictions, marriage doesn't include sharing the swipe. 40. An Illinois man was arrested for recording a police officer during a routine traffic stop. Under an old, broadly interpreted eavesdropping law, recording a private conversation without consent was a felony. Even though the officer was a public servant on a public street, the man faced up to 15 years in prison for simply holding up his smartphone. The law was eventually struck down as unconstitutional, but not before lives were derailed by the simple act of seeking transparency. It makes you wonder, if the law is public, shouldn't its enforcement be public too? 41. In California, a woman was actually arrested and hauled to a cell for the theft of electricity while sitting in a Starbucks. She wasn't hacking their mainframe. She simply plugged her dying phone into an outlet while she finished her latte. The manager, apparently having a very bad Tuesday, called the police and insisted she was stealing a retail utility. Instead of a polite, "Please unplug," she got a pair of silver bracelets and a ride in a squad car. It's a surreal legal reality where a half-penny's worth of power is treated like a heist. 42. A woman in Arizona was arrested for abandonment because she let her 9-year-old son play at a public park alone for 30 minutes while she went to a job interview. A bystander called the police, claiming the child was in imminent danger. Despite the kid being perfectly safe and within sight of dozens of other parents, the mother was arrested upon her return. She lost the job and gained a criminal record for trusting her community. 43. In Georgia, a woman was arrested and jailed for disturbing the peace because she cheered too loudly at her daughter's high school graduation. The school had warned parents to hold their applause until the end, but when her child's name was called, she let out a celebratory "woohoo." A nearby officer didn't share her joy, escorting her out in handcuffs for disorderly conduct. She traded a graduation party for a mugshot, all because she was a proud mom. Does the sound of a mother's joy really constitute a criminal threat to society? 44. A woman in South Carolina once spent a night in the slammer because she failed to return a VHS copy of Monster-in-Law to a local video store. For 9 years, the law sat in wait, brewing a warrant for a movie that isn't even good enough to justify a late fee, let alone a police escort. When she went to change the address on her driver's license, the system flagged her as a cinematic fugitive. She was handcuffed and driven to the station over a piece of plastic. Have you ever checked your old junk drawers for a warrant-inducing VHS? 45. In Oregon, a man was arrested for interference with a police animal after he barked at a K-9 officer through a car window. He didn't touch the dog. He didn't threaten the officer. He just let out a single sarcastic woof. The officer claimed the bark agitated the K-9, preventing it from performing its duties. He was charged with a misdemeanor and taken to the station. It's a strange world where a human can be jailed for hurting a dog's feelings with a sound. 46. A woman in Texas was arrested for theft because she found a $20 bill on the floor of a grocery store and put it in her pocket. The person who dropped it saw her on the store's security footage and pressed charges because she didn't make a reasonable effort to find the owner, like turning it into the manager. It was legally classified as theft of lost property. She went from having a lucky day to having a criminal record over $20. It's the ultimate finder's keeper's cautionary tale that proves luck can be a legal trap. 47. In California, a woman was sent to jail for unlawful disposal of hazardous waste. Her crime? She accidentally dropped a glass soda bottle in a parking lot and didn't pick up every single shard because she was running late for a shift. A bystander reported her license plate, and the police classified the broken glass as a public safety hazard. Instead of a littering ticket, she got a mugshot and a night in a cell. When did a clumsy moment become a biohazard felony? 48. Imagine going to jail for theft of air. In Ohio, a man was arrested for criminal tampering because he used an air compressor at a gas station without paying the 75-cent fee. He found a way to trigger the machine manually to inflate his dangerously low tires. Instead of letting him go with a warning for his own safety, the owner called the cops. He was handcuffed for stealing compressed atmosphere. It's a sobering thought. Even the air we breathe can be a criminal liability if it's inside a metal box. 49. In Alabama, a man was arrested for possession of a gambling device because he had a vintage non-functional slot machine from the 1920s in his basement. It was a family heirloom that didn't even have a power cord, but the state's archaic laws didn't care about its antique status. Because it could theoretically be repaired to take nickels, it was a felony to own. He was treated like a back-alley casino mogul for owning a piece of furniture that his grandfather used as a conversation starter. We've dissected 49 cases of absolute legal madness, and it's time for the final verdict. The trophy for the most brain-melting arrest goes to point 9, the DMV flatulence. While others were jailed for technicalities or thefts, this man was handcuffed for a biological function. The state actually classified a fart as a physical act of aggression. It's the ultimate proof that in some jurisdictions, your own body can be used as evidence against you. Is there anything more absurd than being Mirandized for a loud stomach? Let us know your pick in the comments. 50. A man in Virginia was arrested for reckless driving because he was caught going 81 miles per hour in a 65-mile-per-hour zone. While that sounds like a standard ticket, Virginia law classifies anything over 80 mph as a criminal misdemeanor, not a simple traffic infraction. He was handcuffed on the side of the highway and given a jail sentence of 2 days. He wasn't weaving through traffic or acting like a stuntman. He was just a guy with a slightly heavy foot on a clear, open road. 1 mile per hour made the difference between a fine and a felony. These stories prove that the law isn't always about justice. Sometimes it's just a labyrinth of weird rules and petty technicalities. Your freedom can literally depend on your neighbor's mood or the age of a VHS tape in your attic. What is the most brain-meltingly stupid arrest you've ever witnessed in real life? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the absurd, hit that like button and subscribe for more mind-blowing stories from the world of the unbelievable. We'll see you in the next one.